I want to thank all of you for coming today, and to let anyone who's still sort of out there in the alcove know, there are lots of seats up front.
We won't buy, I promise.
So today, in this session, we're going to learn more about exciting new development forms, including trail-oriented development. This breakout is brought to you today at the meeting by the Utah chapter of the Urban Land Institute. The ULI's mission is to provide leadership in the responsible use of land and in creating and sustaining thriving communities worldwide. ULI is an independent global nonprofit supported by members representing the entire spectrum of real estate development and land use disciplines. So if any of you want to learn more about ULI, we do have the booth downstairs outside of the main meeting room. Today's session highlights two of the core activities of ULI: independent research and the identification and highlighting of examples of best practices in the development field, learning how to do well by doing good. I'd like to introduce our first speaker on our panel today. It's Matthew Norris. He's a senior associate for content at the Urban Land Institute in Washington, D.C. Matt supports ULI's Building Healthy Places initiative and works on projects linking health and development, something that we've been hearing a lot about already today. He previously worked at the Tri-State Transportation Campaign, where he focused on improving access to safe, reliable, and equitable modes of transportation throughout southern New Jersey and the greater Philadelphia area. Matt earned his master's in city and regional planning from Rutgers University, New Brunswick in 2010, and holds a BA in sociology from the University of Kansas. Thank you, Matt.
Good afternoon, everyone. I see there's a little bit of after-lunch attrition, but I think sometimes having a nice, cozy group is great for discussion, so thanks so much for coming. This is actually my first time in Salt Lake City, and what a great event for me to be introduced to all the great work that's already happening here. And hopefully we can add some value by sharing some great stories of success about the intersection of transportation, active transportation, and development in other places across the country and across the world. So we're, each of the three panelists, we're each going to do just a very brief PowerPoint presentation to provide a little bit of background, but then we want the bulk of this session to be a conversation amongst ourselves, but also with everyone here in the room. So I'll just briefly introduce the other two panelists. First we have Alexander Gergich. He is the development analyst for Nelson Construction and Development in Des Moines, Iowa. And he focuses on understanding market demands and trends for new projects in apartment, restaurant, retail, hotel, and office sectors. And he focuses on financial feasibility, project brand and identity, and sees ideas through to successful execution. I also just learned that he was elected to city council as an undergraduate student in some city in Iowa that I don't remember the name of. But learned through that experience at a very young age how important community involvement is in development. And he's actually working on a project called Beachy Flats in Des Moines that he'll provide more information about, that was highlighted in ULI's report, Active Transportation and Real Estate, The Next Frontier. And the other panelist is Nora Shepard. She is the current planning director here in Salt Lake City. She's held the position since January 2015, and she has over 30 years of community planning experience. From 2008 to 2015, she lived in New Jersey. She's another recovering New Jerseyan, and was primarily involved with the Safe Routes to School program.
And we worked together.
We did, yes. She was the New Jersey advocacy organizer for the Safe Routes to School National Partnership, and also worked as a manager for the Safe Routes to School program for Meadowlink, which is a transportation management association. But before that, she spent 25 years in community planning in and around Park City, Utah. So, oh, that's us. I should have had that up. So as I briefly mentioned, ULI recently released a publication called Active Transportation and Real Estate, The Next Frontier. And we asked the question, and we feel answered it, is trail-oriented development the next TOD? We believe that the answer is yes. So there's some important trends underlying that question and the research. A 2015 report by ULI America in 2015 found that over 50% of U.S. residents say that walkability is a top or high priority, considering where they want to live. And then here locally, it's nearly 50% of residents in the Wasatch Front region say that bikeability is a very important factor in where they live as well. And we know from the census that bicycling is the fastest growing form of transportation for commuting in the country. It's also good in terms of the economics, active transportation. There is one of the projects we've highlighted in the report, the Indianapolis Cultural Trail. This is a great example of the power of active transportation in creating opportunities for development. It's an 8-mile loop trail that connects to regional trails throughout greater Indianapolis. And since that trail opened in 2008, property values in the area immediately surrounding the trail have risen by 148%, which is significantly more than in other areas of downtown. And then another trail, a 5.7-mile trail that goes through Midtown and Minneapolis called the Midtown Greenway. They've seen over $750 million worth of new housing that's built directly adjacent to that trail between the year 2000 when it started being constructed and today. So the developers that are building alongside active transportation routes, whether they're bike lanes, trails, bike share systems, we found that there is a growing trend of developers including features within projects, within buildings themselves that really leverage these municipal and regional investments in active transportation systems and that help to facilitate people walking and biking on a daily basis. There's a whole range of them. I have them up here. I won't read them for you. But some of them were found in every project that we highlighted, such as dedicated bicycle storage areas, and some of them were more specialized depending on where the project was. One of the larger trends that we saw was the inclusion of bicycle workrooms, particularly in residential properties, so areas where people can work on their bikes, clean them, and fix them without having to do so in their units or somewhere else. And then there's also been a growth in developers actually contributing financially directly to connecting to an existing active transportation network, a trail or something of that nature, and partially funding trails and bike lanes themselves. So I just wanted to very briefly go over two of the case studies in the report, and then Alexander will lead us through another one, which he's much more qualified to talk about since it's his project. The first is called Mosaic, and this is kind of a unique project in a couple of respects. It's in Minneapolis. It's a mixed-use project, but it's primarily a commercial office development. And this was constructed in uptown Minneapolis, which is it's an area that's more known for shops and restaurants and housing more than office development. But the developer, the Ackerberg Group, felt that the access that the Midtown Greenway could provide from other areas of the city would be something that would really attract the types of tenants in terms of the office space that they wanted to attract, and they were correct. The building is fully leased and is actually now a second phase is going under construction. But I think the most unique thing about the project and one of the best lessons in terms of the power of leveraging municipal investments in active transportation to improve walkability and bikeability for a whole city is the developer actually decided to pitch in over $100,000 out of $370,000 to construct a bridge and ramp that connected directly to the trails, so people could access the building by bike, by walking, and they found that their tenants found that this is one of the main reasons that they were attracted to the building. And then I also wanted to discuss briefly a regional infrastructure investment that has started to spur private development alongside it. This is an initiative called the Circuit Regional Trails Network in Greater Philadelphia. It's a plan to connect over 750 miles of off-road trails throughout southeastern Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey. Currently 300 miles of the network are in place. And it's a very collaborative partnership between the nonprofit sector, multiple city governments, the local metropolitan planning organization, which is the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, the private sector, and really just a whole host of very different groups that have come together to ensure that this vision happens. And it's really seen as a transportation network. It's not just something for recreation. The trails that are being built and planned connect directly to the region's rail transportation system, directly to downtowns and centers of employment. And trails that are part of this system have already begun to reap economic benefits. In fact, in one of the suburban communities outside of Philadelphia, a trail called the Radnor Trail, properties that are directly adjacent to that trail are valued on average $69,000 higher than those that are just a little bit further away. So with that, and I discuss those projects in more detail during the conversation part. I'll hand this over to Alexander, and he's going to provide some good information about the Beachy Flats project in Des Moines.
Sure. All right, so I'm a real estate developer and investor, and a quick little product placement. Blue Copper Coffee is really great in Salt Lake City, and I swear this relates. So I'm supposed to stay on top of trends and, explore cities, and everything's research. And I found local craft coffee places, the baristas there can unlock the city. And so going around Salt Lake City has been really interesting, and learning and using the baristas as guides. So you should all stop by there. But more importantly than that, I hope you all support those places in your communities too, because they help build the culture, unlike a Starbucks. So with that, in addition to being on top of trends and everything like that, as a developer, I have to sit at the nexus of creativity, design, also financing, city processes, everything like that. So as a private developer, it'll be important for me to talk about kind of how we went through this financially as well a little bit. So I'm going to talk about Beachy Flats. That's the logo. Beachy stands for bicycle in Italian, really creative. And Flats, we're in an Italian-American neighborhood, kind of. And so Flats is just a more European way to say apartments. So this is Des Moines, Iowa, and this is downtown. And we sit at the convergence of two rivers, the Des Moines River and Raccoon River, and there's lots of trails that go throughout our whole metro area. You can go 60, 70 miles in each direction probably. The yellow dots are really where most people would consider downtown. So that's where rents are in the $1.65 to $2 per square foot range, going back to the finance stuff, but it won't be really boring, I promise. So that is where things are actually market viable. You can do more market rate stuff, you can do cool projects, you can do things that really fall in line with a lot of these urban trends that everybody's talking about. The red circle is the little neighborhood where Beachy Flats is. Traditionally, single-family homes, not a bad area, but not that great. Apartments there might get $110, $120 per square foot rents. Definitely not enough to make a market rate project really viable with everything, with all the trends and kind of urban processes that everybody's talking about now. So let's zoom in a little more. So the red dot this time is Beachy Flats site. We have this weird kind of hexagonal, triangular shaped site, but the yellow highlights are all the bicycle trails that are nearby. So that's a lot. So this site was overlooked for a long time, pseudo-industrial, but it's just literally right across the pedestrian bridge there to downtown Des Moines. So you can walk 10 minutes and be in the heart of everything. So we consider it downtown. But again, traditionally the market rate rents, they just haven't been there. So when we started looking at a site like this, here's a little better view of it. I started to see the value in the bicycle transportation network, in the recreational aspect of it. We don't have as much of a commuting culture as like Minneapolis, for example, but it is still there. So I was sitting here scratching my head, like, why has no one done anything with this site? It's right at the convergence of all these trails and rivers and everything. And it's really because of, it's just outside of downtown. So here's another view of it. Again, pseudo-industrial, transitions into single-family homes after that. So as we were going through the planning process, working with the designers, we thought, let's gear a project that takes advantage of this. Nelson Construction and Development, as developers, we don't just try to take prototype stuff and plop it around everywhere, because multifamily's hot right now. We look to really see what our project will add for value, what the tenant experience will be. You know, we don't want to just design spaces, we want to design experiences as well. Because really, I think that's where the value is, and I think that's what the modern day urban resident wants. You're seeing that in the transition and push toward boutique hotels. All the major flags are trying to come up with new ones that kind of straddle the line between those things. And so similarly, multifamily projects, mixed use, et cetera, I think taking that approach of what is the value proposition to your tenant, what's different. You can't get by with just it's urban anymore. So that's what Beachy Flats is going to be. So it's under construction right now, and it's opening now in March of 2017. So a big departure from what was there, right? This is from that pedestrian bridge looking back at the site. So we have 3 buildings situated on the site, again, kind of a awkward triangle-shaped site. 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom layouts. We have 4 different total layouts. Again, we sit at the nexus of all these trails. But then as we started diving into amenities, there's another probably more close-up view. Rooftop deck. We have all the things that the urban residents want. But again, we started tailoring the experience through the amenities, through the unit design, through everything to fit in with more of that urban active lifestyle and really what the value proposition is for that location. Here's from the middle parking lot kind of looking out. So that's downtown Des Moines in the background, just for context, so you can tell. Yeah, that's the tallest building in Iowa. It's not that tall, but it's there. So, so anyway, that's like the picturesque view of downtown Des Moines. And there it is again. So this is the rooftop deck community room without any furniture or anything. These are just in-process renderings, a lot of them, with roll-up doors. But when we start to talk about amenities, we have the bike workroom, workrooms that Matt talked about. We have dog washing stations. As far as cycling goes, we also have, right when you walk into the left where the bike's hung, is kind of almost a little mudroom type space. Very tiny little space, but we changed the flooring to be more of a rubber type material so that it denotes more of a mudroom feel and a different designation of that space, a planned use for it. And you can store your bike there or other stuff. One thing we've really found, even though we started with the bicycling theme, it's really amazing. Urban active is probably the better word. So even if you're not a cyclist, people run on these trails. People walk to downtown Des Moines. Overwhelmingly, these people have dogs and animals. And so we're a pet-friendly building. And all the leasing feedback we've heard, we like to ask a lot of questions and learn as much as we can. So everything we've learned, it's overwhelmingly a huge draw for dog owners. So we actually canceled and axed this little urban adventure launch area off the side of one of the buildings on the levee where the bike trail is right there that runs alongside our site. And we actually doubled down and made this really cool dog park, or we're making it now. So that's one thing. Don't forget about the dog owners, because you start to look at the demographic trends and it's overwhelmingly growing, especially in the millennial age group. So we acted more nimbly in order to accommodate that. As far as unit design goes too, you can check the box and just have bike repair rooms and bike wash rooms and all that stuff. But we also looked at unit design so that those balconies, you actually have a straight shot from your front door to the balcony so that you don't have to meander through your furniture with your bike if you want to take your bike out onto the balcony, for example. So it's all of those things, working with designers, that we can really cater this whole experience to. Never mind. So I'm not going to skip ahead. So I think that's the overwhelming kind of snapshot or overall snapshot for Beachy Flats. I really want to hear your questions. I think our big thing now was we were able to get the $1.65, $1.75 rents in an area that was traditionally $1.10, $1.20, which really is the tipping point for market rate projects in our market. We also have tax abatements. City of Des Moines has been great as far as recognizing what needs to happen in order to spur this development, but we also stand on the shoulders of all the regional cooperation that's been done to invest in those trails, invest in the rivers, everything else that is there. So with that, I'll turn it over.
With any luck, my slides are next.
Yes. You never really know. Welcome, and to those of you who are here from out of state, sort of piggybacking off the other conference, welcome to Salt Lake, welcome to Utah. So Matt, in ULI has all the data and information about how people are really interested in living somewhere where they can bike and walk. And then we have, a developer who really sees that there's a market for it. So things are really sort of starting to fall into place for this, but it's also just a really important thing to do. If we want to rebuild community, we really need to make it easier for people to get out on the streets, get out of their cars, and walk and bike and interact with each other. We've sort of become these anonymous neighborhoods in some ways, and where we can walk around and not know anybody. Like in New York, you can be surrounded and be lonely, but Salt Lake's not that way. And, it's an important thing to do in order to build community, to feel safe, to feel part of something. So I really believe in this stuff. So I was in New Jersey, as I mentioned, or as Matt mentioned. I was there for 8 years, which was an adventure. Before that, I was 25 years here in Utah. I moved to Park City in 1984. In the 8 years in New Jersey, I worked in the bike ped world. So I worked closely with Matt and a bunch of other folks who were working on safe routes to school and getting bicycle and walking infrastructure in place. And I really liked it. It was really a fun world to exist in. And when my husband retired, which the deal when I moved out there, I married a Jersey boy, was that when he retired, we'd move back west somewhere. And he was getting ready to retire. I found out that Wilf was leaving, Will Summercorn was leaving Salt Lake City, and so I applied for a job and came out here and interviewed. My husband came with me, and I was really amazed at the change in the last 8 years in Salt Lake City. When I lived here before, I lived up in Park City. People didn't live downtown in Salt Lake, and I never really thought of it as a place I'd necessarily want to live. But all of a sudden, Salt Lake City has changed, and it's sort of hip, and you can get around, and there's apartments, and so it was really a pleasant surprise. And Salt Lake City has done so much in the last 8 to 10 years to really move the city forward in that direction. I can't claim responsibility for really any of it, but there's been really a lot of forward thinking. Plus, this is Utah. We're all like recreation fiends, and the West. And so it's important, and we have to provide connections to those recreational opportunities. But beyond recreation, it's important that we incorporate these kinds of things into our everyday living. So, here we are. We did Plan Salt Lake, which was sort of our umbrella guiding document in Salt Lake City. It was adopted last year, and this is one of its guiding principles. It's really important to provide mobility choices and connecting people with places. And then we have a whole bunch of other plans. These have all been very recent. One of them hasn't quite been adopted, but the other three have been adopted within the last year. Some of them within the last few months. And all of these really key on that walkability, bikeability, densifying around transit, those, livable qualities. So the ideas have permeated throughout all the plans, kind of as a trickle down from Plan Salt Lake. Recently, the City Council adopted one of those plans, the Pedestrian and Bicycle Master Plan, which you can find online under the Transportation Division. And there was a lot of preference surveys that were done to find out, how comfortable people were walking and biking in certain locations. And so it generated this master plan, which is really awesome. And as I mentioned, you can find it on the website. It was really led by Robin Hutchison, who is our transportation director, for a little while longer, a couple more weeks. She is awesome. She did so much to move Salt Lake City forward in terms of bike ped improvements. Regrettably for us, but lucky for Minneapolis, she is moving to Minneapolis to be the public works director there. So I'll be really sorry to see her go because she has done so much really positive stuff for Park City, or for Salt Lake City. I wanted to give that plug. So once you have the plans in place, then you have the zoning, right? So we have a veritable alphabet soup of zones that try to address this issue. We have just some of them. This is just a few. We have the TSA, the FBUN1, the FBUN2, the FBSC, the FBSE, and a whole litany of other initials that talk about mostly form-based zoning. And all of these have a couple things in common. One is they're all trying to densify with mixed use, residential and ground floor commercial in some cases, around our transit corridors. And they're also really encouraging walkability, bikeability when we can, and just being more livable. And the form-based codes require things like setbacks so that people feel like there's a pedestrian scale and wider sidewalks and all those kinds of things. And in Salt Lake City, we're really starting to see that come to light. We've got a lot of density along both North Temple and 4 South, which is where a lot of this is. And you know, we're going back in to do some tweaks because now we've seen kind of what we wrote down, and there are always unintended consequences. So we're definitely going back to take a look at that. But it was really bold to go in and do this, and a lot of people hate it. A lot of people are learning to like it, and it really has attracted a lot more people to downtown. So on the ground, again, due largely in part to the Transportation Division, we have a couple protected bike lanes on 3rd South and 2nd West. I personally love them. A lot of people, again, hate them, but that's to be expected. It's new and different, and I think people will learn to like them and use them. We also have an ambitious plan that's moving forward that's called the 9-lane corridor. There's already, on the west side, there's already a fair amount of it built. It's a multi-use trail, and there's a planning process that is just getting started right now to look at planning for the whole section from Immigration Canyon to the Jordan River. And so if you live in Salt Lake, you have opportunities to participate in this plan. East-west connection we've always really needed, so that's really exciting. Multi-use, you can use it to commute, catch light transit, or catch transit, or whatever you need to do. So I think that's an exciting thing. Then we have a boogeyman that everybody knows about, but when it's like today, it's hot, but it's beautiful and clear, but air quality is a huge issue in Salt Lake. And it's not just that it doesn't look good, it's dangerous and it's unhealthy. And I'm an asthma sufferer. You can kind of hear it today in my voice a little bit because the ozone levels are probably kind of high. But we have to deal with getting people out of cars and reducing emissions. We really don't have a choice for health reasons and also for economic development reasons. If we want to continue to promote business and economic development in Salt Lake City and the region, we really need to deal with our air quality issues. We've got this natural sink and meteorologic conditions that aren't going to change, so the thing we have to change is what gets stuck in there. And the fewer cars, the better off. So it's really important on a regional level that we deal with these things. Anything we can do to get people out of their cars. So here's a case study, somebody I know really well. So when I moved back to Salt Lake, as I mentioned, I was really excited about living downtown. My husband and I, all of our kids are out of the nest, so we're empty nesters. And we lived in apartments in New Jersey, and so we're kind of used to that semi-urban thing. Well, very urban, actually. And so when I was interviewing, my husband looked around at a bunch of downtown apartments, and we chose this one, which is on 5th South and roughly 5th East. And in its advertisements, it says, walk to work. It says apartment living bike wash and racks in a secured garage, close to tracks, close to downtown and Trolley Square business districts. They also have a dog wash, which is big for me. So they're really, you know, in the marketing material, they're really pushing this stuff. And our building is very interesting. I mean, we can walk everywhere. I walk to work. Tracks is a block away. All of our shopping we do right there, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, Smith's, True Value, Staples, it's all within a couple blocks. So it's really awesome, and we really like living here. And it's promoting that very lifestyle that we need to see more of, and that we are starting to see more of, where people can walk and bike. And we only have one car, so we're an example of downsizing in terms of cars and turning more to alternative modes of transportation. There are a lot of millennials that live in this building, not too many college students, but millennials, young professionals, and many of them don't have cars at all. Some of them have one vehicle, but still take tracks to work or walk. And they're really, everybody in the building just, you know, wears workout clothes half the time because everybody's really into being fit and active and sort of the Utah lifestyle. And so this is the kind of development that we're starting to see and that people are demanding. So I think that's really cool. In a previous life, there's a real demand for this kind of living. But in a previous life, when I was up in Park City, I started there in 1984. I worked for the planning department, and there was one little stretch of multi-use path right in City Park, right kind of in the middle of City Park. And we were trying to get all these new developments, these new condos and everything to put in paths so that they'd all interconnect someday. Nobody wanted to do it. Nobody thought it was necessary. But we were the mean people, and we made them either do it or give us money so we could do it later. And now Park City is like a mecca. I mean, the whole reason people move there is because of the trails, both multi-use commuting trails and recreational trails. It's like, you know, everybody rides the trails there. There's lots and lots of trails. And when I bought a condo up there, one of the main reasons I bought the place I did is because it had a trail right out the back door that led to 100 miles of trail if I wanted to go. So it, you know, and I'm not a millennial, but it's still attractive. And, you know, it's important. People want it. People like me want it. And people are choosing it. So in summary, I think that this stuff is really important for many, many reasons. There will always be those naysayers, people who don't like change, people who think bicycles are bad or just a bother, people that think that we need to make all the roads wider to better accommodate cars. But we have to be bold. You know, we have to do this. And we have to give people transportation choices, and people are demanding it. We need to do it for us, for our air quality, for our kids, for our community. So that's my piece.
Great. Thanks, Nora.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Here's my info.
I think as we've gone through the day today, we've heard a lot, and primarily from the public sector. And the public sector is absolutely essential in terms of planning, designing, and implementing active transportation. But I think one of the reasons we were so excited to be a part of this day today, and that we found the research that we did for the active transportation report so compelling, was that I think that the private development community piece is equally important. So I had a first question for Alexander. We really found through the research that that reciprocal relationship between the private and public sector was extremely powerful in maximizing the benefits of active transportation, really everywhere we looked throughout the world. And we heard from you earlier that certainly, you know, it's a great investment financially for Nelson Construction to build alongside 3 trails, and I think that's clearly one of the arguments that we need to be making. But I was wondering, from your perspective, what role do you think that developers and the private sector have in terms of kind of being de facto advocates for enhancing and increasing access to active transportation?
Yeah, so I think private development, a lot of times it's tough because people don't understand some of the hurdles we have to jump over and people we have to convince. Even if I want to put our money into a deal and my money into a deal, we have to convince other people like banks and others, that actually is okay. And so I believe a systems mindset in anything is really important. So it isn't as easy as just like A and B, like developer likes site, developer makes money on site, build something. We have to, get appraisals. And when the appraiser sees market rates are $1.10 in that area, it's going to be really hard for me to go to the bank and other investors and say, no, trust me, I'm a really smart young guy, And so we've been able to really dig in, and the Greater Des Moines Partnership is kind of our regional chamber on steroids, I guess, kind of the chamber of chambers, and they've done a lot in terms of data, and so anything you guys can do to help private developers build their case to the banks, the appraisers, everybody, that's really important. So I think that's once you get someone to buy into this idea like me, helping us get over hurdles. Those are some of the problems we really solve in getting the deal done. In terms of, I don't think you're gonna have to work that hard to convince developers of the value proposition, whether it's trails and rivers and everything. We recognize the investment that our regional governments have made in these things, just like some of our other deals we've built on top of investments in plazas in the middle of downtown and everything like that. So I guess the biggest thing is just outreach and understanding the process that a developer has to go through and make their case, because oftentimes it isn't that we don't want to, it's just help us, get there. Is that maybe? I don't know. Yeah.
That's great.
Okay. Cool.
I think let's you in the red shirt. Let's take your question.
I don't know, what color am I wearing? So, my name is Dick Kreitz, I'm Cache County Trails Planner, and I wanted to bring up sort of a question to you, and the basics of it is, what attracts good multifamily to an area, is the basic question. The reason I ask that is that I think we're sitting here down in Salt Lake City, now if we travel about 60 miles in any given direction in Utah, you're gonna get to communities that are largely single-family homes. I'm asking this question outside of inclusionary zoning, of course, that has to be there. But in a lot of our communities in Cache Valley, we've seen some master planning efforts go through where the whole community and city council says, oh, we don't want any multifamily. We don't want any density. Even if our overall planning processes have gotten us towards that, even if everything else, they see multifamily as, that junk they give students with a parking lot all around it full of asphalt, it's low quality, it's horrible, we don't want that. So, we know that to be otherwise. My question to you is, in the private sector is, when you're doing your research, what's sort of coming together for you to say, this is a good place to invest in good multifamily?
Yeah, so my man Ethan back there is doing a great job of filming this, but he has no audio connected up except for these, so I'll just repeat the question. What attracts a private developer, good multifamily, to an area, and what has to come together to make that happen? Price per square foot's the overriding factor. I mean, more than anything, as far as when I start to look at sites and what I can get sold. And so I have to be able to build a really great story to everyone around price per square foot, amenities, what's going to happen in the future. But that's in my seat. I think you're also thinking about how to convince other stakeholders that have negative misconceptions around multifamily. So I think data can be one of your best friends. I mean, if you look at all the data recently of, drops or slowing growth in home ownership rather, and huge spikes in renting, I think if you can start to pull that stuff together and have that be in your back pocket and an ace up your sleeve or whatever metaphor I'll keep using, that can be huge in terms of it isn't just young professionals or party or young professional millennials. It's also empty nesters, although the data's, I don't know, I think it's more PR than anything. But aside from Nora here, she's awesome. But I mean, as far as like an overwhelming trend, I think there's still some data that needs to be drummed up there. But look at all the other data and show, median incomes even for people that rent in multifamily is going up. And so it's an emotional misconception, and it's not built on data or facts. So as much as you can do that, and as much as you can use really great pictures to help communicate that as well, because it is an emotional preconception. I think that can really help you. I will say the market rates in Des Moines, even though we were able to get those downtown rates and make this project viable, they're still not high enough. Like Minneapolis is $250 or higher per square foot. I mean, Chicago, New York, forget about it. But the cost to build these buildings, whether it's in, is it Chase? Cash, whether it's there or in Des Moines or Chicago, they're about the same cost to build those buildings. So when you look at a return on cost metric, I don't know where that return comes from, and so our city, fortunately, has been advantageous and done 10-year tax abatement for multifamily on the increment. There are tools that without them, there's no way that it works. And so I'm not saying you have to incentivize everything, but understand the hurdles you have in front of you and understand and learn from the developers what they're going through too, because in the end, you'll both get to where you want to go.
I just want to very quickly piggyback on something you just said. So in terms of your investment as a developer, what proportion would you say the bike features that you included are in terms of your investment and related to the value that you think that they may add? I know you can't exactly quantify it.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception too that, we have to spend a lot more money on these cycling and recreational amenities to build a project that works like that. But let's be honest, it's not true. It just, again, if you want to slam out prototype like a huge, giant cross-country multifamily developer, then sure, derivating from that prototype is going to cost a lot of money in design and everything else. But these amenities are not expensive, right? Like bike workrooms are not expensive. Dog parks, depending, are not, super expensive. Doing your unit layouts, it's not about money. It's about investment and in design effort. And that doesn't mean you have to hire fancy architects. It just means you have to dig in and learn who your tenant is, learn what your value proposition is to them, and design around that. And so even dog washes, they can be as simple as basically like mop sinks, right, as far as cost, or they can be really fancy. But either way, we're not talking about huge, crazy amenities here. So if anyone pushes back on that, Beachy Flats was developed at a unit price or price per unit that is well within line, pretty much the same as a couple other projects we've done just on the outskirts of downtown. So, yeah, it's not really about investing more money.
I saw that TED. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Can I just add a little bit? I know, in Utah we have a lot of more rural Utah, like Cache Valley. Quite frankly, there's probably some of these things definitely should be adopted and looked at, like connectivity and mixed use, so people can actually walk to places that they need to go. And I think as our population ages and places like Logan, as they age, more and more folks like us will have to, like me, and a little bit older, will have to give up their keys, or maybe should give up their keys, and it's really important to provide other ways that they can get around. And so, even on a small town scale, I'm not sure that it's realistic to expect we're going to have all these big, huge multifamily apartments, nor is it necessarily appropriate. But certainly some multifamily that provides some affordability and some mixed use so people can walk to services that they need, those are things probably to strive for, rather than, you're not downtown Salt Lake City, you're not downtown Provo. It's a whole different thing, but there's still elements, I think, that would apply.
Sorry, one last quick, I forgot to. Maybe one thing that is, we don't have parking minimums in our city, and that's really clutch, because it will get expensive because, pun intended, but anyway, it will get expensive if all of a sudden I have to buy a lot of land to dedicate to parking for a certain ratio and everything else. Then it will be, expensive in general for multifamily, but well, no, not in our urban core, or even this is like, there's a targeted multifamily abatement district, which really includes downtown and also then this neighborhood. And so, no, we don't have that. And that's really important. That can get really expensive. And the other thing is, I do projects that are larger. Sure, Beachy Flats is now it's 19 million. I think it was like 17 in the deal, but we added some stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's a $19 million project, 154 units. There can be fourplex, sixplexes that get done. There's a movement of small developers. They have a Facebook page. There's an article recently I read about it, and I started poking around, and people that want to do smaller stuff but still do it really well. And so it's kind of like you don't have to chase after the Starbucks, like, you know, find the blue copper and like let them do their thing and grow. So
Yeah, and I just would really quickly add on to that. The parking minimums is a huge issue. One of the other case studies in the report is it's actually an all affordable housing project in Albuquerque, New Mexico, built alongside bike lanes, kind of in downtown Albuquerque. And in the zone that they're in, it's a historic zone right on Route 66. They don't have parking minimums there, and they actually, at that project, only built 30% of the parking spaces that they could have by law, and they found that half of those are going empty because A, people are downtown, can walk places. B, they have excellent bike facilities within the building and outside, and it's also, in terms of an equity standpoint, a lot of the residents there, since it's an affordable housing unit project, they might not be able to afford to own cars, so they were able to invest in other places in the building to make it an attractive, high-quality building that has seen a lot less resistance than some other affordable housing projects have in the region. So I'm going to go to Ted, because I know you had a burning question back there.
Probably you could tell by the way I was raised.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks so much to ULI for putting on this really interesting session. So here's my question. If you're a city or a county and you're thinking about how to use active transportation facilities to attract economic development, does this suggest that it's better to invest in fewer but higher quality facilities, you know, separated bike paths, off-street trails? Or is it better to invest in a broader but perhaps lower quality network? If there's a trade-off, where would you go if you were working to attract economic development?
So I'll start, and then I'll probably throw it to Nora. I think from the research, at least in terms of this report, I would start, I think you have to have those kind of trunk main routes if we're really thinking about active transportation as transportation and not just recreation. I think along the line, I mean, the answer is you need all of it, honestly. But if we have to prioritize, in terms of economic development, the really high quality separated bike lanes, the studies have shown there's huge economic benefit for businesses. People shop more along streets like that. There's one study here in Salt Lake City. I think it was Broadway. It's like 8 or 9% higher sales when the high quality facilities came in. And then in Philadelphia, an example I gave earlier of the Circuit Regional Trail Network, there has really been a focus on getting in those long distance, high quality trails that connect between transit, centers of employment, and then at the meantime, on a more local level or down the road, providing more local access and making sure that all streets are safe for all people. That's important in terms of equity and access, but in terms of economic development, definitely those high quality long distance routes. But I will ask Nora if she agrees with me.
Yeah, I do. I mean, when we used to go around talking about complete streets in New Jersey has really a wide variety of community type, from really urban to really rural, and everything in between. And, a complete street in one place, even within a community, may be defined as something completely different than a complete street in downtown Jersey City, which is where I lived the last few years. Very urban environment. And I think Matt's right. You need to have a sort of a core, a spine, if you will, that maybe is multi-use if you have the land to do it, and that you do what you can, and that what happens, and the hope is that people will start using that, and more people will get on their bikes, and then the drivers will get more used to people being on their bikes, and then there'll be more support for other kinds of facilities. But you can't just, if you go in and put in a bunch of separated bike paths, well, there's probably not the political will for that, because they want to spend money on other things, unless that political will is built through building the bicycle community and the demand for it. So it's kind of a little bit of, you got to be bold and move forward, but you also have to build the demand and the culture.
I'm going to disagree. I'm going to disagree. I think I live in a different world. So, for three reasons. I think there's the moral argument, which is a lot of these if you only focus on like big central things, like I really hope that spine includes many parts of your city. Because I think there's a moral argument to it, and too often cities, not saying that's what the panel's advocating, but too often cities basically build urban amenities, and it's for, upwardly mobile white people. So that's not as fun or as moral. So number two is node theory. I think if you look at mathematical node theory, fax machines, what's the value of one fax machine? Nothing, because it can't talk to another machine, right? What's the value of two? Well, it's increasing. What's the value of three? It increases exponentially the more nodes you have on a network. And so just pure mathematical reasoning, I believe a lot more that you need to have more little things potentially can yield greater benefits. And also, I think it allows you to do more experiments. Because I think what I see too often is there's these huge efforts that require a lot of investment, a lot of time, and everything else, but you don't get to experiment enough, and then you don't actually learn. So it's a long feedback loop, which by the time you get to the end of the feedback loop, you can never reincorporate it into the beginning as well. And then the third thing is timeliness. I live in a world, if you're trying to protract private development, everything else, that I can't wait a few years for, a capital campaign or federal funding or whatever for this big, spine or whatever it happens to be. I'm having to ebb and flow with the market. I have to, it's the world I live in. And so the more you can do these little experiments, Jeanette Sadik Khan, who was under Bloomberg in New York City, gave a great TED Talk. I was at it, and she talked a lot about it's amazing what you can do with some paint and some furniture. I mean, we didn't have to create this big park. You could shut down part of a street, just paint the street and add some furniture and see what happens and do these experiments. And so I think, things like protected bike lanes, I'm fighting this in Des Moines. People are wondering why bike lanes aren't as, helpful in certain parts of the city. Because they're not protected. They don't feel safe. A line of paint isn't going to do anything for you. So then they think, we have to do all these big expensive bollards and everything else. Well, no, you can bump out parked cars and those will act as the bollards, right? Again, experiments. So I come from a different background. I'm kind of contrarian, so take that for what it's worth. But that's the kind of stuff I'm looking for. My bankers can't wait a few years.
And I definitely agree with that. And like the 9 line that we're working on started on the west side, which is often discussed as less served community, sort of underserved community, and it is really important to provide people of all income levels with all different ranges of transportation choices. We also have to provide affordable housing in all areas of the city, and that's a whole nother discussion, which we in Salt Lake City really need to address. But I was going to mention the New York City. I mean, brilliant. Rather than try to get approval through a process that must be unbelievable. I mean, you think we're bureaucratic. New York City must be amazing. Rather than try to get an approval for these permanent facilities, she just went in and did them, and no real permission, just said, well, let's just try this, and it works. And, I know in New Jersey there's you have certain days where you kind of create this bike lane that's temporary so people can see what it's like, and those kinds of things can be really successful to educate people and make them realize, or hopefully they will see that there's value.
I would just add one thing. When we're talking about big things in terms of transportation, active transportation investments are inherently inexpensive relative to any other kind of transportation. So I think, I don't disagree with what you said, Alexander, but I feel like there's an opportunity to rally the troops and create something that's big and also equitable, and in the world of transportation, inexpensive, but very visible, and that kind of changes the tone in a city or a region, gets people excited, and then, you know, demanding those types of smaller improvements in their local area. So I want to keep having this conversation, but we're running low on time, and I do want to get to at least one or two more questions. Unless we answered all of your questions. Yeah, right there. Yep.
For Alexander, I guess mostly. And you may not know the results of this yet, since I guess your project isn't completely done yet. But two questions. One, looks like you found a diamond in the rough and are doing a good job of polishing it in this nexus of trails and so forth. Have you seen that investment start to catalyze similar types of trail-oriented developments, if you will? And also, I look at that map and I see that wonderful river you have, which we don't have here in Salt Lake City. I can see myself coming on overnight kayaking. Is that part of your...
Jordan River,
Yeah, well, yeah.
they
But
did.
it's not right outside my door, right? So, is that part of your marketing? Are there investments to make access to the river easy and so forth?
Yeah, so I guess the question is Beachy Flats catalyzing other projects like it? And then two, is our region taking advantage of the river in those ways? So one, since Beachy Flats kicked off, then there's another project, Jackson Crossing, that's a few blocks away, that's underway. It isn't taking that urban active theme necessarily, but it's activating that neighborhood. And now actually I just acquired a parcel in a different area in the Market District of downtown Des Moines that I think is also near kind of a different urban active value proposition to tenants. So it is happening. So that's good. And even though we aren't fully leased because we don't open until the spring, it's been amazing how many people have applied with non-refundable deposits as well as have signed leases. The 3 most expensive units are already pre-leased and were 4 months ago. So that's amazing. I mean, in this day and age. So then the second thing about the rivers, the main river, there's a dam, so you can't really use it as much as, I mean, you would go over and it would end badly. So you better not use it. But there's actually a lot of work being done to potentially get rid of that dam, and it's an ongoing conversation because our region recognizes that people want to recreate and, you know, be engaged with that river. There was a river walk that was created, which has been an abysmal failure. I'm probably the only one that's honest enough to say it. But a big bunch of corporate leaders probably flew down to San Antonio, saw that river walk, and said, we need one, right? And it was executed so poorly. And also, it's all about context, right? We have all these municipal and basically non-consumer facing uses around our river. It's a buffer zone, horrible. So really, the recreation is the way people are going to engage. It's not about a walk. And so efforts are underway is the answer to your question, and I think that's only going to lead to even more success for Des Moines.
All right, so it looks like we are on the dot at 2:30. So I just want to say for everyone on the panel, thank you so much for attending this session. I don't know if there's more copies of the Active Transportation Report outside, but if there are, please feel free to take one, or they retail for $19.95 online. Or you can just download it for free, which is probably what I would do. Anyway, I know that Alexander probably has to run to the airport soon, but I guess there's a few minutes. I think the 3 of us may have just a little bit of time to hang out up here if you have any other questions, and we'd be happy to answer. And thanks a lot, and thanks to Christine and to everyone for inviting us.